In part 2 of today's lesson, we'll be exploring more concepts of adding additional data and dealing with outliers. And so let's take a look at our first problem here, and it talks about using this table, and we're dealing with the NFL again. And so it talks about most successful coaches in the NFL, and we need to find the mean, median, and mode. So we talked about in part 1 what the mean is, and so let's just go right into it. We'll just add up all the numbers. And so we take all these numbers, 170, 168, plus 193, plus 209, plus 179. We add up all those numbers, and then we divide by the number of numbers. So we're dividing by, in this case, 5. And so we go ahead and do that work. And when I add up all those numbers, I ended up coming up with 919 wins from all of those 5 coaches. And we divide it by 5, and that gives us our average, or our mean. And so in this case, the mean equals 183 and 8/10 is what I get when I divide those numbers. Remember, you're always doing the top dog in the doghouse, and so it's end up looking like this, 5 into 919, and that's how I got the number. Well, they also ask for the median, so let's go ahead and write out all these values. So our median, we start by listing these numbers, and let's start with the smallest number, 168, and then go up from there. So we've got 170, and then it looks like we've got 179. So let's put some marks showing that we've used those already. 193, and then 209. So those are all the numbers. And so we just kind of work our way into the middle. And so in this case, when we have an odd number of numbers, we talked about in the last part, that we have one of the numbers being the median. So in this case, the median is 179. Well, looking at the mode, we want the most frequent. So we need to find something that repeats, but there's no numbers that repeat. And so if we don't see any repeating numbers, that means that there is no mode. So those are the answers for number 3. Well, on number 4, what they're going to do is they're going to add in an extra bit of data, and that's what this whole assignment is about, is adding in extra data and looking at outliers. And so here it is. It's 347 games was won by Don Shula, and he was the most successful NFL coach, and we're supposed to add this to the data set. So we need to find the same values, the mean, median, and mode. But then also we have to describe which is the best description of that data. And so let's go ahead and add these numbers together. Again, for the mean, you just add up all of the numbers. And so we're just taking 170, 168, we take that 193, take that 209, we take the 179, and you just add in Don Shula's wins, which was 347 wins altogether. And we divide by the number of people that we're dealing with. In this case, it's 6, because we have all these people plus Don Shula. And so really all you have to do is add 919 plus 347, and when we end up doing that, so we come up with 1,266 wins altogether. Divide that by 6, and it does go in there evenly, and that goes in 211 times. So 211 is the new mean. And so this is our mean in this case. And we go ahead and find the median. Now all you're going to do is just rewrite your numbers for the median. So let's go ahead and write median. And we'll rewrite our numbers in order, so 168. So it's real important to make sure you put these numbers in order. If you don't, you'll end up with the wrong answer. So you got to put them in order, and it doesn't matter whether it's least to greatest or greatest to least. As long as they're in order one of those two ways, you'll get the right answer. So you work your way into the middle, and when we have an even number of numbers, we have 2 numbers that are in the middle. Well, we only want 1. And so what you're going to end up having to do is add these numbers, 179 plus 193, and then divide by 2, and that will give you your middle number. And so when we do that addition, we end up with 372. And we divide that by 2, and it goes in there evenly because it's an even number, 186. That is the median. Well, then it asks for what the mode is. Well, he still don't have a mode. We haven't had a mode for this whole section yet. So there's no mode because there's no numbers that are repeating. Well, from this point, they ask us which best describes the data. Well, looking at the data, again, it's the same as what we looked at in questions 1 and 2 in part 1 of this lesson. We see that when we had this outlier, this extra number, this bigger number added to the data set, look what it did. It increased the mean from 183.8, which was a pretty good representation, kind of in between these values. It increased it to 211. And notice that 211 is bigger than 4 or 5 of these numbers. The only one it's not bigger than is the one that we added. And so I wouldn't use the mean in this case because of this extra number. So typically I'd use the mean, but I'm not, let's say this, I'm not going with the mean. And the reason why is because, not going with the mean because of the outlier 40, or not 45 in this case, but 347. So I'm not going with it because of this outlier here. And so instead, I'm going to go with one of these two, the mode or the median. Well, since there's no mode, we got to go with the median. And median is kind of closer to these numbers. Notice how they're all kind of in the upper 100s, 168 to 193, plus this one that's pretty close to 200, it's 209, and 186 is kind of in that range. So that makes more sense. So I think the best is the median in this case. Otherwise, if I was to pick the best one in problem set number 3 here, problem number 3, I'd go with the mean. Typically, I go with the mean unless there's an outlier. Well, let's read the next question. When an outlier is added to the data set, which of these measurements will usually change the most? Well, the most. Well, remember, the mean changed, but look how much the mean changed by. Here, that went from 183.8 to 211, so it did change. The median. Well, the median, so let's go ahead and write some things down. This was 183.8 to 211 is what it changed to. The median, let's go ahead with a different color to show that. This one went from 179 to 186. So these both changed a little bit. They both got bigger. But look at the range. We didn't do the range the first time, but look what's going to happen to the range. The first range would be from 209, we'd have to subtract 168. So if we do that subtraction real quick, we end up with 1. We're going to borrow here, so 41 would be the range. Over here, if we did this one, see, we added that 347, and now that's the biggest number. And so the smallest number is still the same, 168. We do that subtraction, and we end up having to borrow all the way back from the 3, change it to a 2, 13 to a 13, or 14 to a 13, and then do the subtraction, and we end up with 9, 7, and 1. So 179, wow! Well, that's even more wins than 3 of these people. One of them is the same number of wins. So obviously the range changed the most when we added that outlier. Well, if an outlier is greater than the data set, okay, the outlier is greater than the other data in the set, then how will it affect the mean of the data? And this is kind of what I've been talking about quite a bit. And right up here, it kind of goes with it. And so look at what happened here. We ended up having to add that 347. And so that number is quite larger than all of these other numbers. We did have to divide by one number higher, which will seem to make the division be a little bit big or smaller of a number. However, because we added so much more, it actually increased that mean quite a bit. So whenever you add an outlier that's greater, it's going to end up increasing the mean. It's going to increase the mean. So let's write that down. Outlier that is greater increases the mean. Now, they don't ask it, but what happens if the outlier was smaller? So that's the answer for this. But let's just say the outlier is smaller. That is smaller or less. And so instead of increasing this mean, it's going to do the opposite. An outlier that is smaller decreases the mean. So typically, again, I don't use the mean as a good central tendency. I don't say it's the best central tendency when you have an outlier. I go with either the median or the mode. But in the cases that we had, there was no mode, so we had to go with the median, and that's why we went with them. So those are types of problems you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework. Good luck.